Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Ravnica Allegiance draft guide. Today we are going to be looking at Gruul, one of the most popular guilds in the comments section of my previous guides. So to everybody who left a comment requesting Gruul, here you go. Thank you so much for the requests. I really do appreciate them. Before we dive in, I have a couple of announcements. First, I do want to remind you that if you enjoy this draft guide and want to see more draft guides, you can find them on my YouTube channel. There will also be a link to them in the description and in a pinned comment down below. And if you want to see the other remaining guilds that I have not yet covered, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. If this video gets 50 thumbs up, I guarantee I will be making another guild guide. So be sure to show your support that way. And if you want to get updates for whenever I post new content, including future guild guides, be sure to hit that subscribe button, support the channel, and don't miss out on any of my future videos. But without further ado, let's dive right in. In this guide, we are going to be talking about what Gruul wants, why to draft Gruul, how to draft Gruul, and then key cards and synergies in Gruul. So pretty straightforward, just like Gruul. The mission statement for Gruul, this is basically what the guild wants to be doing in draft, and I have it as play efficient creatures and hit the opponent with them until they die. So a pretty straightforward mission statement. And then the second part, use haste from Riot to force through the last points of damage. I think that's the benefit of Riot, is that you can use the duality of it to start off the game with very hyper efficient creatures that are very large, and then in the later part of the game, the board may be stalled, and you play that last creature to just push through the final points of damage, especially because a lot of Riot creatures come with some built-in evasion, like Menace or something of that nature. So I think that is going to be what you want to be doing as Gruul. But the real question we're all asking ourselves is, why do I want to play Gruul? What are the main benefits in terms of cards? And the thing that Gruul has that I think it does better than almost any of the other guilds, maybe it's the best at this, is it has really powerful gold cards, even at the common level. So it has great gold cards at uncommon, which is to be expected from a guild's set, but also the commons are a little bit better, I think, than the gold commons that other guilds have access to. So just looking at this list that I have before you, Sunder Shaman, 4 mana 5/5, it's just huge. But at common, you have Frenzied Errands, which is a 4 mana 4/4 that can pump itself late in the game. So this common is also a massive card. And as I talk about Frenzied Errands as a 4 mana 4/4, you may be saying, but wait, it's a 4 mana 3/3 with Riot. And I do want to say that when you're using Riot, especially in the early parts of the game, I think you almost always want to put the counter on your creature. I think that will give you the highest long-term benefit and the most overall synergy with your future plays. It's just going to be really beneficial to have bigger creatures early in the game, and then late in the game you can play your guy as a haster to get in that surprise damage. I will be talking about all of these cards in more detail later, so we're going to go over them now, but I do want to emphasize that both at the common level and at the uncommon level, Gruul has amazing gold cards. When you're drafting Gruul, your highest priority is going to be to take strong creatures. Gruul doesn't have the best removal. It does have several fight spells, and to make those fight spells work, you are going to want to have strong creatures. It also has some smaller burn as well, but strong creatures are going to be the base of any good Gruul deck. If you see one of the strong uncommons that I will talk about in a moment, you will probably want to be taking the strong creature and then taking removal a little bit later, because your creatures are going to be able to threaten the opponent without needing removal to push through damage. They'll just be bigger and push through that way. Another way to push through damage is with combat tricks. They can keep your creatures alive in combat, because a lot of the time your opponent may have to double block your creature, and then the combat trick can really just win you the game. And also, combat tricks have a second mode in Gruul, because a lot of your creatures are going to have Riot. You can play your creature, give it haste, and then attack them, buff it up with a combat trick when your opponent least expects it, to burst them out of nowhere. So they attack you all out. They think they're about to stabilize and win the game. They attack you with a big attack that you're going to be dead next turn maybe, and then you play your Riot creature, play your +3/+3 on it, and hit them for like 7 in one turn and win the game that way. So I think that is going to be a very effective strategy with Gruul to get those last points of damage in. Okie doke, here we are at the top commons, and you may notice Perennial All-Star Skewer the Critics. But wait, it has Spectacle. That's not the Gruul mechanic. It doesn't even matter. Skewer the Critics is such an efficient card, and it's going to be good in any aggressive deck, any deck at all really, because 3 mana to deal 3 damage is already fine, and if you ever Spectacle it out, you're just so far ahead in terms of mana that you're oftentimes going to be able to win the game or vastly snowball the game off of that. A standard scenario for Gruul may be to play a 2-drop creature If they're lucky, it could be a 2-mana 3/3 Zertog Goblin, and then attack the opponent. The opponent can't afford to block because their 2-drop was not a 3/3. They end up taking the damage, and then you skewer the critics, their 2-drop, play another 2-drop, and you're vastly ahead. If your 2-drop, if you have a 2-drop and your opponent doesn't have one, you can do a similar. Like if you have a 2-drop that's hard to block in some other way, or you have represented a combat trick and your opponent doesn't block, Skewer the Critics punishes that. And also you can just cast it for 3 mana to kill your opponent's creatures. I think Skewer the Critics is going to be a very high pick. Another element of Skewer the Critics is that it can go into Gruul or Rakdos. Being a monocolored card makes it a very high priority early in the draft. That being said, I still think it's stronger than a lot of the gold cards that Gruul has access to, which is really at the common level, which is really saying something because the Gruul commons are quite strong. Coming in at number 2 on the commons list, I have Sorrowform Hybrid. A lot of its strength does come from the fact that it is a monocolored card. As a 2-drop, it is going to be necessary if you're trying to draft an aggressive strategy like Gruul will oftentimes be. They're kind of more mid-rangey aggressive, so it will have a little bit higher on the curve as well, but it is a very good 2-drop. Because it's a 2-drop that's great late in the game. It's going to be able to pump itself, become a 6/6. Gruul does have some minor synergies with +1/+1 counters as well, so it works with those if you have adapted it. And also, Sorrowform Hybrid can fit into Simic, so it is another monocolored card early that can fit into multiple decks, and therefore I think it will be a high priority for Gruul. Coming in at the number 3 common for Gruul, I have Savage Smash. I think that this card is a pretty great removal spell for Gruul. Gruul is going to oftentimes have pretty decent creatures, 3/3s and 4/4s and the like, and you can almost always kill a creature with fighting if you're giving your own creature +2/+2. So this is definitely a good removal spell for Gruul to have access to. And then sometimes your opponent only has 1 blocker, you give your guy +2/+2 and kill it, and then you hit them for a big chunk of damage, which can be quite relevant. One thing to keep in mind is try not to get blown out by instant speed removal and bounce. Sometimes you have to go for it and hope they don't have it, but a lot of the times you can play a creature instead and play around it. So try to not get blown out using your own Savage Smashes. Number 4, I have Frenzied Erranks. 4 mana 4/4 is just a pretty good sized body. I'm treating it as that, and then it has the additional upside of being a 4 mana 3/3 trampler as well with haste when you need that effect. And then being able to pump itself makes it so that it can really attack on any board. A lot of the time they're going to have to double block it. If they are single blocking it with a big creature, you can pump it so that it does trade anyway. So I think Frenzied Erranks is going to be quite good. And then finally, I have Rebel Pelt Runner. I don't think it's going to be absurd or anything, but it is a solid creature. 3 mana 3/3 varies depending on the format. In some formats, it's a very, very good stat line. In other formats, it's less necessary because you're winning late game fights with bigger creatures. But I think that Rebel Pelt Runner is going to fill a nice role in Gruul. So I think you should be taking that card fairly highly once you know you are in Gruul. Okie doke, now we're going to start talking about some of the Gruul All Stars. I have been hyping up the Gruul Gold cards, but funnily enough, I think that one of the best possible cards for Gruul is not even a gold card, and I think it might be a card that is flavored for Simic, and that's right, it's Biogenic Upgrade. I think that Biogenic Upgrade is unbelievable in Gruul, quite frankly, because it can just win you the game on the spot if you cast it and you have 3 creatures in play. The key to Biogenic Upgrade is that Gruul's creatures oftentimes come with +1/+1 counters built in. So the way it works is you've played maybe your 3-drop has a counter on it, your 4-drop has a counter on it, and then you just have a miscellaneous like creature lying around. If you use Biogenic Upgrade on a creature that has a counter on it, then you end up netting +3 counters. So even if only one of your creatures has a counter, you're going to end up 5 counters for 6 mana over 3 creatures. But if 2 of your creatures have counters, you end up with 7 counters. And so Biogenic Upgrade can facilitate these massive attacks and huge swings, and I think it's just going to be a very good card. And if your creature ever has multiple counters on it for any reason, you basically just win the game. So if you play an adapt creature in your Gruul deck, which is definitely a reasonable thing to do, there are several green creatures, including Sorrowform Hybrid. That's a pretty good one. And then you use Biogenic Upgrade on your Sorrowform Hybrid. All of a sudden you're going to have a 12/12, and you have done great work. So Biogenic Upgrade, I think, is going to be a pretty good card in Gruul. Next up, I would like to mention again, I showed a picture of it earlier, but now I'm going to talk about it in detail. Sunder Shaman. It's the red, green card for Gruul, the CC card, as they say. 4 mana 5/5 is just a huge creature if you can cast it on curve, and the fact that it can only be blocked by one creature at a time means that it's oftentimes never going to be killable in combat, and if they can't, and it's bigger than all of the burn spells as well, and a lot of the removal can't touch it. So that means that Sunder Shaman, if you cast it, is going to be very difficult for the opponent to answer and can probably run away with a lot of games all by itself. So Sunder Shaman, one of the best reasons to be Gruul, definitely a high pick. Zertog Goblin is definitely a card that's going to be frustrating for many people over the course of the format, just because when your opponent plays a 2 mana 3/3, the game feels very, very unfair a lot of the time, especially if they follow it up with a reasonable 3-drop. The way Zertog Goblin is going to work is every time you have it in your opening hand, you're going to feel very, very favored, and even later in the game, a 3/3 is still a relevant creature on many boards. And the fact that it can be a 2/2 haster on those turns where you want to alpha strike or you can hide it in your hand, as I was mentioning earlier, to pair with a combat trick to get your opponent out of nowhere is also some added upside. So I think Zertog Goblin is going to be very, very powerful as well. Bolrak Clan Crusher is a card that I think is very, very interesting, and I actually have it rated very highly to start with at least. Its ability of removing a counter from your creature to deal 2 damage to any target is really scary, not only because it provides a lot of reach in that you can get your opponent down to 6 life, play your Bolrak Clan Crusher, and then just know that you have a couple of creatures with Riot that are going to have counters on them, and then just do 2 unblockable damage 3 times and kill them. But also because it can just kill smaller creatures and then enable your creatures to attack through. So it can also, and additionally, you say you have a 2/2, like say you have a Zertog Goblin play, and your opponent has a 4/4. You can attack your Zertog Goblin into their 4/4. If they block, you remove the counter from Zertog Goblin, do 2 damage to the 4/4, and then the 4/4 dies anyway. So I think Bolrak Clan Crusher is going to make combat a nightmare for opponents. It makes it very hard for them to double block if they have smaller creatures, and overall I think it's going to be quite good. And then the final card I do want to mention is Collision Colossus. I think that this card, it's not on the same power level as these other 4, but it is still quite good. Colossus is a very, very good combat trick for Gruul. It lets them push through damage. Trample is really nice with a lot of the relatively big creatures you can get in Gruul. Just imagine using it on a Sunder Shaman. They finally get a 5/5 or something, and then you Colossus it and just hit them for 4 anyway. But another reason it's quite nice is because the collision part of the collision part gives you some unconditional removal, essentially, for flyers. Which is sometimes a problem for red-green decks historically, because sometimes they don't really have blockers for the skies the way other color combinations often do. So they rely on reach creatures and removal specifically for flyers, and having access to an effect that you would usually sideboard in the main deck, because the combat trick part is pretty good, I think is going to make the card quite nice. If you do notice, 4 of these cards are gold cards, and these are just some of the best uncommons you can be playing in your Gruul decks. Gruul has so many good cards, in fact, that I do want to take some time to talk about some more of them. They're not all they're not all like as good as the previous ones I mentioned, but they're all still quite good cards, and some of them you might not expect. So, for example, I think that Trollbred Guardian is a card that people are going to see and think Simic, but I want to make sure that the people, at least that all the folks watching this guide, have it in their minds that just because a card's flavor is for Simic, just think of the 6-drop I just showed you guys, the one that gives the counters. Just because a card has the flavor of a certain guild doesn't mean it can't perform in other guilds. So Trollbred Guardian is going to be quite nice in Gruul because its ability that has to do with +1/+1 counters makes it so that your creatures are oftentimes going to have trample, especially your big ones. So Trollbred Guardian is just going to be phenomenal, I think, in Gruul, especially because its own adaptability makes it a 5-mana 7/7, at least with threat of activation and things of that nature. Light Up the Stage, another card that's going to be really good. It does have Spectacle, which people might associate with Rakdos. Doesn't mean that this card's going to be bad in Gruul. Gruul doesn't... the times when Light Up the Stage would be bad is if you have conditional cards in your deck, like counter spells. But with Gruul, a lot of the cards in your deck are going to be creatures, so you're going to be able to attack them, hit them, pay 1 mana, exile 2 cards, and then if it's 2 creatures, you can just play those creatures over the next couple turns, and Light Up the Stage is going to be like a draw 2, which is just really nice to have access to in Gruul, which is a color combination that traditionally doesn't get a ton of card draw. Flames of the Raised Boar is a card that I think is actually going to be very scary. The ability to deal 4 damage to one creature and then 2 damage to everything means that oftentimes you can just solo board wipe them with this card. or kill almost everything on their board, and then just kill them out of nowhere. Gruul does have the capacity to have creatures with power 4 or greater to enable the second part that deals 2 damage to everything they control. So I think that it's going to be every creature other than the one you targeted already. Oh, never mind. It just does 2 damage to each of them. So it does 6 damage to a creature and 2 damage to all of them. So yeah, Flames of the Raised Boar is going to be quite fearsome. Oh, no, it does say each other creature. I was right the first time. It does 4 damage and 2 damage to everything. That's what I thought. Okay. Card aside, Flames of the Raised Boar is going to be quite good in a Gruul, I think, just because you can sometimes stall out, but then you can just massacre their entire board. I think Rumbling Ruin is another card that can be used in Gruul to good effect. The counters that you can get from Riot, even if you have 2 counters on everything, the fact that they won't be able to block with 2 counters combined over all your creatures, the fact that they won't be able to block with all of their smaller guys means that you can oftentimes hit them, because if you think about a normal game of Limited, in specifically a board stall, usually the board is stalled because one guy has a couple big creatures and the other guy has a bunch of small creatures, and Gruul is oftentimes going to be the guy with a bunch of big creatures, but they can't attack through because a 5/5 doesn't necessarily trade profitably into a 4/4 and a 2/2. But if you then make the 2/2 unable to block, your 5/5 is able to attack. Finally, I do want to mention the Clan Guildmage. Making a creature unable to block is pretty nice, and I think that the ability to animate a land is really cool, especially on defense. People probably will underestimate this, but you can hold up the Clan Guildmage and 3 mana, and if your opponent attacks you, you can just animate one of your lands, use it to block, and that will be quite effective, as well as with it using that to facilitate attacks. So overall, quite a nice 2-drop. Here are some cards that I think are traps for Gruul. I first want to talk about Rhythm of the Wild. It's a card that I'm not sure on. I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about whether Rhythm of the Wild is a good card in Limited, and I've come to a couple of conclusions. First of all, I know that I'm going to get crushed by this card at least one time, because it's very, very powerful if you play it on turn 3, or if you play it like when you're already ahead. So for example, if I play this on turn 3, it's basically an anthem, because every creature I play can come in with a +1/+1 counter on it, which makes them all bigger. However, and also you can give them haste when you need to just finish me off even faster. If I'm ahead, my creatures are getting bigger, which makes it harder for me to block them, and they can come in with haste, which makes me under a lot more pressure. So in those situations, Rhythm of the Wild does pretty good work. However, I think that Rhythm of the Wild is pretty bad when you're behind or later in the game as a top deck, which I think takes away from the value of the card overall, especially compared to a lot of the creatures you could be playing in the set instead. So if you just replace Rhythm of the Wild with a 3-mana 3/3, in the game's early stages of the game, a 3-mana 3/3 is quite a nice play. When you're ahead, a 3-mana 3/3 is quite a nice play, those are the best situations where you would want Rhythm of the Wild. But when you're behind, a 3-mana 3/3 can actually really help you when you're stabilizing. If you have to mulligan, so you don't necessarily have the creature density that you would normally have in a 7-card hand, Rhythm of the Wild looks a lot worse, whereas a 3-mana 3/3 can help you draw out of your mulligan. So I just think Rhythm of the Wild is the type of card that people are going to overestimate because it's a good constructed card. Because in Limited, the creature spells you control can't be countered is like not relevant in many games. Maybe you can side in a Rhythm of the Wild if you end up with one and your opponent has shown you multiple counter spells, because that's a decent way to blank them. But I think that in a lot of games of Limited, Rhythm of the Wild is going to be a card that looks like it's winning you the game, when in reality you would have won the game anyway with a reasonable 3-drop, but then it'll lose you games where you top deck it late and you're like, wow, all of my creatures are already played, I have no cards in my hand, this card is useless. Or you played in the middle stage of the game, you're like, okay, I get to Riot with 2 creatures or 1 creature, and I don't think that's worth it. I think it's only really worth it if you have it in your opening hand and get to Riot with like 4 creatures or something like that, and then you'll really like Rhythm of the Wild, because 3 mana to put a counter on 4 creatures would be really good. But the way Rhythm of the Wild works is you're not guaranteed to have that effect. A lot of the time it's going to be something like you put a counter on 2 creatures, or you play it and you die, or something like that. So I think Rhythm of the Wild is actually not going to be insane, though I am open to experimentation, and it is a card that I will probably try out. I just think your win percentage is probably going to be higher in the early stages of the format if you don't play this card. Even if you lose to it, still be wary of the fact that you could have lost to a variety of other cards in that situation, most likely. A couple other traps that I want to mention, Storm Strike and Stony Strength, kind of go hand in hand with this idea that I'm thinking of, in that you don't necessarily want the small pump spells for your creatures. I'm not saying they're unplayable. I think you can definitely play one or two of those if you need combat tricks, but they're not the ideal combat tricks that you're looking for, because a lot of the times, Storm Strike in particular, it doesn't buff the toughness, so you can't use it the way that you would oftentimes use a combat trick to like protect your creature from removal. Even if it does scry your card, it'll help you win a combat, but a lot of the times it won't even help you win the super important combats. It's much worse than Sure Strike, even though it does have some parallels. Stony Strength is a card that I feel like is going to get people early in the format, and I think that that may bias their view of the card later on. They'll attack with their 3/3, their opponent will untap their 3/3, put a counter on it, blow you out completely, and you'll be like, wow, I just got destroyed by Stony Strength. That card must be great. But as the format goes on and you recognize your opponent holding up a green mana, it's going to be really easy to play around. And these 1-mana combat tricks that don't have a huge impact are oftentimes not good historically in formats. So I don't think Stony Strength is going to be great either. Another card that I think is going to be a trap is Burn Bright. One thing to note is it is different from Trumpet Blast. You can use it on defense because it does give your creature +2/+0 regardless of whether they're attacking. That being said, it's not a great defensive tool. I think Burn Bright is just not really what Gruul wants to be doing. They already have a decent amount of burst damage because of the fact that they want to run some good combat tricks. They want to run creatures that have Riot, so they'll have a little bit of haste damage. And Burn Bright just isn't really where you want to be. You want to be playing as many creatures as you can in your Gruul decks, and your non-creature spells are really going to be removal spells, and then maybe one like bomb or maybe a sideboarded hate card for flyers or something like that. You don't really want Burn Bright in those slots. And then finally, Open the Gates. It may just seem, oh, I'm just getting whatever land I want. It makes it hard for me to color screw, but I think it's going to be pretty bad unless you're splashing. Open the Gates. You're paying a mana to get a land is just not usually where you want to be in Limited. So I don't think Open the Gates is going to be particularly good. It reminds me kind of Attune with the Ether from Kaladesh. But the thing about Kaladesh was it cared about energy. Attune with the Ether gave you energy. Open the Gates doesn't really give you an extra resource, so it's not going to be that effective, I don't think. So finally, things to remember about Gruul, also Gift of Strength, because I really wanted to show this card, but I couldn't figure out a place to show it. Things to remember, good gold cards are the best reason to be in Gruul. If you are starting out a draft and you don't have any of the great Gruul cards, and you're just seeing red and green cards, a lot of the time that's not going to be a good sign for you. If you're drafting Gruul, you want the gold cards, because the gold cards are where the strength of Gruul is most noticeable. Second big point is that you want to take combat tricks that offer large stat boosts. So whereas before the combat tricks gave +1/+0 and +1/+1, even though that was a permanent counter, Gift of Strength gives you +3/+3, even though it costs an extra mana. That's really where you want to be because it lets you do those burst plays that I was mentioning. It also works nicely with some of your tramplers, with your big creatures that are going to get double blocked. +3/+3 is actually quite nice. And then reach can be relevant as well. And then finally, a thing when you're playing any aggressive deck, but I think particularly with Gruul, is know your outs at all times. So if you get your opponent to 5 life and you have a Skewer the Critics in your deck, you may be more willing to make an attack that'll put them to 3 so that you have an out, which means that it's a card that you can top deck that will win you the game on the spot. And in a deck that may have multiple Riot cards, particularly ones that may have Menace or cards that may buff your creatures when they attack, I think knowing your outs at all times is going to be important for Gruul, or at least know your main outs. Finally, the last section of any good guide is how to beat the deck that you just spent a long time hyping up and describing. So how do you beat Gruul? First of all, Death Touch is going to be really good against the large creatures and also the fight spells. Black has an instant that can give their creatures Death Touch for 2 mana. It's like 1 in a black, give a creature Death Touch, draw a card. And I think that's going to be quite effective against Gruul, especially as a sideboard card. They may play their 2 mana 3/3, but if you play a Death Touch creature, it's going to trade no matter what. There's also a 3 mana 2/2 Death Touch in black. So this beating Gruul doesn't mean you have to be a black deck that's running Death Touch cards, but keep in mind that Death Touch is going to be really nice against Gruul. So even if the Death Touch cards end up being relatively bad overall, I don't know how they'll play out in the format in general. If you have some in your sideboard, maybe consider bringing them in against Gruul. Another big tip, this is the same against almost every aggro deck, just affect the board early. Maybe lower your curve, maybe play a 2-drop that you wouldn't really normally want to play. You just want to make sure that you have some creatures on the board. And then finally, try to play around the combat tricks that Gruul has by holding up removal. Bounce spells fill a similar role. Combat tricks of your own can also do this. But basically, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to just push 3 creatures into a triple block and then your opponent destroys you with a combat trick. If you can, you want to be able to hold up a removal spell of your own in those situations. And I know that's not always going to be possible, but that's just a general advice, I guess, against a lot of aggressive decks. But Gruul in particular, because a lot of their creatures are going to need to be double blocked because they're going to come in a little bit overstatted and they're going to be pretty fearsome. So Gruul seems kind of tricky to beat, just maybe based on these 3 tips, but keep in mind that it is just a creature deck, so you can play creatures of your own, you can trade, and a lot of the time you can have a pretty good late game, and maybe if you can hold on long enough, your late game removal can come online and beat the Gruul opponent. So there is no hope against Gruul, there's just less hope. Okay, anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. As always, remember to hit that thumbs up button to ensure future guides, and hit that subscribe button to support the channel and get updates for whenever I post new content. If you haven't, I really do appreciate each and every one that subscribes. We are getting really, really close to 1,000 subscribers, so if we can get there, it'd be nice. If you want to see my other guides, be sure to check them out on my YouTube watch page, and also check the description and the pinned comment. And finally, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. If you have any comments, leave a question, and I will see you in my next guide. Peace. I don't know why I ended with peace. I guess Gruul would say, Riot!